right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be giving my speech today about how to study effectively and active learning and kind of a little bit of what it is. If everyone could give a wave really quick before I begin. Awesome. Thank you very much. So this is going to be my note card. You can see I got some notes over there. In the back, it's empty. All right. So I'm sure many of us have been in this situation before when you've encountered a chapter or a topic that you just couldn't grasp in the moment. Hours and hours spent on reading a chapter or a book or a part of the textbook and just to forget what you read the very next day. I'm sure it sounds familiar, but I have good news for you. You're not alone. In fact, there was a study done by researchers at Nicholls State University in Louisiana in 2009, which had two randomly selected classes to learn an intro to business curriculum. It was the same curriculum, but the catch was that one was taught with passive learning techniques and the other was taught with active learning techniques. Results found that students in the active learning group had greater overall retention and understanding of the material compared to the traditional course. So currently, we live in a world that is just overflowing with information. I feel like there's everything around us from social media to the news is just trying to grab our attention and just fill up the storage capacity in our brains, right? Over the past 2 decades, the prevalence of ADHD diagnoses in the US increased from 6.1% in 1997 to 10.2% in 2006. And this is according to National Institute of Health and the Missouri Medical Association. So the way that I relate to this is that I feel the need to mention this because I've struggled as ever since I was a kid with attention deficit disorder, and it made me more self-aware about my study techniques and how I can help myself do better and succeed in a classroom setting. So, this is where active learning comes in. But what exactly is active learning? My name is Fabian, and today I would like to talk to you about what active learning is, what kinds of methods you can use as part of your day-to-day life as a student or professional, and how you can implement these methods based on different subjects. So, active learning, defined by Cornell Center of Teaching and Innovation, is defined as discussing, problem solving, and creating while engaging with new information. So, how does learning happen, right? Learning happens when the brain creates and fortifies new neural connections through a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. According to Dr. Keith Sawyer, an American psychologist who is currently a professor at Cambridge University, says that listening to a lecture or going over notes, just skimming over notes, isn't doing much for long-term retention because not as many neural connections are being formed. I give the example or the analogy of when you're lifting weights in a gym. When you're doing a squat, for example, and you're recruiting more muscles to do the movement, your quads, your hamstrings, whatever, you're able to move more weight. Similarly, active engagement, when you recruit more neurons, more neural connections, and you're using more of your senses to encounter new information, that makes it easier to reinforce and to remember it in the future. Now that we know a little bit of background about active learning, what does it actually look like in practice? Active learning involves actually interacting with the material. So actually engaging with it. Passive is more like being just exposed to it and kind of in the background, and you're not really interacting with it per se. You're just kind of letting things get to you. And that is why, like I mentioned previously, you're not forming those neural connections for you to be able to recall that information in the future. There was a journal done, or a review, sorry, in 2005 by the Medical Teacher Scientific Journal And researchers found out that repetition in realistic hands-on scenarios led to more effective skill retention. This was seen with medical students studying for getting the residency, and found that through these hands-on curriculums and experiences, they were able to implement these skills real time in the future because they were forced to recruit all these different neural pathways to remember the information. So that's the difference between active learning and passive learning. And now that we know that, how can we apply these strategies across different subjects? So different subjects require different types of study techniques. And in order to get to be as effective as possible, we need to understand what thinking each subject requires. So, for example, when we look at STEM majors, chemistry, engineering, physics, things like that, it's largely very conceptual and it's usually not very intuitive. So, how do you effectively study for those kinds of things? You have to problem solve. You have to give yourself case studies. Put yourself in a scenario where you have to work through the problem step by step. And you do that over and over again, and that repetition will allow you to recall the information to be useful in the future. When you look at professional skills, such as speaking and writing, things like interviewing or networking, you do better at those things when you actually put yourself in these scenarios. So in these kind of hands-on experiences like we saw with the medical students, you are able to put that into practice and not necessarily recall information, but just that exposure, that reoccurring exposure, otherwise known as spaced repetition, allows you to be more comfortable in those settings. When you look at memorization heavy topics or subjects, biology, psychology, history, these you would benefit in creating mind maps, in telling yourself mnemonics to recall that information easier because it's so loaded with new information and things to remember. And lastly, you have more specialized subjects such as the arts, learning an instrument, learning a foreign language, and you have to kind of combine, mix and match these techniques to be more effective. Finally, I want to look at some key takeaways from today. So, what did we look at? We looked at what active learning was and how it strengthens neural pathways. We looked at active learning methods versus passive learning methods, retrieval practice, spaced repetition, and passive learning, like highlighting and rereading your notes. And lastly, how active learning methods correspond to different subjects. Like anything worth doing, understanding topics and studying effectively takes dedication and intentionality. I hope this information was valuable to you all in some way, shape, or form, and I hope that it would make us better learners as well. So that concludes my speech. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. Now we will head into a Q&A time. Are there any questions?
Were there any specific kinds of combinations that research would suggest works for more specific things? Like you mentioned the arts or learning an instrument or a language, like for example 60% active versus 40% passive, or something along those lines, more mnemonic, that kind of thing.
Yeah, great question. So um, when you're looking at mixing and matching, right? Um, so for me, for example, I have a lot of biology and chemistry courses. So what I do for chemistry is not the same as what I would do for biology, right? Um, do I mix and match with the study strategies with different subjects? Absolutely. Why? Because I'm forced to remember things in a different way. So for chemistry, I'm not just problem solving over and over and over again. I'm saying, okay, how can I explain this to someone who doesn't know chemistry at all? How can I explain, paramagnetic, paramagnetic and diamagnetic electron orbitals to someone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, right? So, using different techniques, study techniques to understand different materials will always benefit you. But understanding what kind of study techniques fit what subjects is your like primary goal, and then everything else off of that is just kind of supplementary. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Yes.
Yeah. So, how do you find which strategy works best for you? And how do you how can I focus on? Because sometimes when I'm studying and using what I try to do, I get distracted super easily. How do you stay focused on the study strategy that you know works best for what you're working on right now? Like you said something about case studies and other things. How do you know which one to pick?
Yeah, so number one, because I have ADHD, so I struggle with distractions quite often. Number one thing I do is when I am studying for a subject, making sure I have a space with, absolutely no distractions other than the work that I'm supposed to be doing, putting my phone in a different room or giving it to my roommate and, hiding it somewhere, right? And then understanding what study technique goes with what subject. I think it just comes down to like how you're expected to learn it like in lecture, if that makes sense. So if you're noticing your lecture is like problem heavy or like, okay, term heavy, like remember this, remember that. Kind of just going off of that and then applying it to your own study time. And then also, how do you work yourself as a student? Do you work best? Are you more sharp in the mornings? Are you more sharp in the evenings? I know that I personally can't work after 6 p.m. when the sun goes down. So I wake up pretty early to get my studying done because that's when I feel the sharpest and that's when I feel like I can get the most work done. So, yeah. All right. Thank
Thank
you
you.
guys
Thank you.
so much. Appreciate it.